Welcome to the Once and Future Authors Podcast. I'm Stephanie, and I am so excited today to be joined by author Carren Strock. Carren is the author of Married Women Who Love Women and More. And this book is not just a book, it is actually a life-changing experience for the readers, and I dare say our writer. So please welcome author Carren Strock. So glad you're here with me.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
Oh, absolutely. You and I were chit-chatting before about how your book is beyond, I had a good story to tell. I mean, first of all, it's your story also, but you wanted to make sure that a message got out, that people are empowered by even just finding the book on a shelf. Can you share a little bit with our listeners what was the impetus behind writing the book in the first place?
Well, I was married for 25 years. I was sitting across the table from my best friend, and I looked at her and I thought, oh my God, I'm in love with this woman. And I didn't know what to do with it. Our friendship was based on such openness and honesty, though, that within a week I was telling her how I felt. And my feelings were not reciprocated. And I went on a quest to find out, was it just her? Or was I one of those women? Was I a lesbian? I had no idea. I lived in New York, but I had no connection with that community. I knew no gay people. I knew nothing, where to go, what to do. And I started on a quest. And what I found was the more women I spoke to, the more women knew women who had similar experiences, or they themselves had had them. And I started writing an article, and I realized, well, I had gone to a writers' conference, and one of the topics was good book titles. And I was just too lazy to think of one, so I thought, well, I'll use the title that I'm using for my article. I said, what about Married Women Who Love Women? And all of a sudden, there was a hush in the audience. And I thought, I just outed myself to this 60 or 80 women that were sitting in this huge room. And here I'm going to be here all week and nobody will speak to me. And then this goes back in the early 90s, when it wasn't talked about yet, the idea of lesbianism. And one woman tentatively raised her hand as she says, how does a woman make that discovery? And then another woman raised her hand and said, what kind of men are they married to? And another question was, how do their children deal with it? And I realized, my God, if these women had those questions, they couldn't be the only ones. And I realized it was too important a topic to write as an article. It needed to be a book.
Absolutely.
And that's where it started.
Oh my gosh, that you're so right. And you had this audience right there raising their hands, giving you your chapter titles.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
But it was difficult to do. I hadn't yet come out to my family. I hadn't come out to anyone. I was at dinner with a friend who was a writer, and I said, I'm thinking of writing a book about married women who love women. And she said, I can't see you wasting your time on that. She says, I don't know who would be interested in a topic like that. Anyway, I dropped her off after dinner. I got into the house. She calls me up. She says, Carren, write that damn book. I said, what are you talking about? She said, I came home. My husband was pacing the floor. He had just gotten a call from his best friend. His wife had left him for another woman. So this was the first person that I had mentioned the book to. That was the response. And on and on.
And on and on and on. I'm sure when you talk about it, like you said, there are so many people who this was not something that was talked about at the time, but even today, when people are more open, you're talking about married women, and
it's still a frightening topic.
Exactly. If an 18-year-old young girl who isn't attached, wants it both ways or is exploring, that's a very different idea than someone married for 25 years with children.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I could certainly see why the women that your book is touching are people that this is a can of worms that they're opening in their own heart, first of all, like you felt. But then
I'd like to share this story.
Please.
After the first edition came out, and now there have been 3 different editions because so much has been added. the third edition has a chapter now on transgenders. After the first edition came out, several people texted me, what about the single lovers of married women? And everybody wanted their piece in the book. Anyway, I was doing a talk and this woman came, and it was a really stormy night. If I wasn't the speaker, I never would have come. I mean, it was really bad out. This woman came in clutching the book and sobbing, and she came right up to me and she said, your book saved my life. And then she shared her story that she thought she was the only married woman ever to have fallen in love with another woman. And she had no idea who to talk to, where to turn, what she could do. And she decided the only thing she could do for her husband and children was kill herself.
Oh.
And she had actually planned her suicide. Even now, when I tell the story, I get goose pimples years later. She had actually planned her suicide for a night that she knew her husband and children were going to be home late. And she was walking home from work for what she thought would be the last time. And she passed a bookstore and they were putting my book in the window. When she saw the title, Married Women Who Love Women, she knew she wasn't alone. Now, how synchronistic is that? And she decided not to kill herself.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, I can still see her face. I can't remember her name, but I
I
can
just
still
got
see.
I just got shivers. But I'm so delighted, well, of course, that she survived. I'm so glad that she told you, but it makes me think, if she told you, how many other people have you changed? Have you saved? Have you altered the very course of their life, and they didn't get the chance to tell you?
Well, I was doing a talk on book writing at the International Women's Writers Guild several years later. And I was using the book as an example of what to do when you're writing a book, how to organize it, et cetera, et cetera. And so I told them the title of the book. And one woman gets up and she says, I think that's disgusting. And she walks out and slams the door. Anyway, several years later, I was at the same conference doing another workshop. This woman comes up to me. She says, do you remember me? I said, I'm sorry, but I don't. She says, I took your workshop a few years ago, and I was the one who told you I thought it was disgusting. She said, I want you to know I'm living with another woman now.
Oh,
So, he who doth protest the most.
That's the line. He who doth protest the most. Absolutely.
That's one of the things I've learned is it's never about me. It's about you and how you choose to hear what I say,
Yes.
where you are on your own particular journey.
So somebody who's walking out of your workshop, where what's going on there. That's unbelievable. Yes, I'm sure. That's what I was going to ask you about pushback. And I want to wind it back to your family. I work with a lot of authors, and many of them reveal things in their books that they think, oh goodness, I never told my mother about this, or my husband, and we end up having that conversation about the fact that when you put something in a book, you're kind of like putting it on a billboard out there for the entire world, and are you ready? But you put your billboard right there in the cover. So
well, it was terrifying at the beginning. I thought, do I have the right to do this? What about my family? Will they be in jeopardy? Will they be in danger? What about myself? And I knew to do it, I had to do it honestly. And to do it honestly, I had to come out.
right.
I couldn't do it in third person. I had to share my story. And so I did, and I spoke to my children. I spoke to my husband, and it was difficult at the beginning. I can't say it was all smooth sailing, but I have the most wonderful family. They're very, very supportive, and they accept me for who and what I am. And I've been blessed that way. When I showed my brother the introduction of my book, which basically tells my story, he says, Carren, you're my sister. I love you. I don't care who or what you are. I love you. And that was the response I got from everybody. My mom was alive at the time when the first book came out, and she said, I'm only sorry you didn't tell me earlier, so I could have helped you. I could have been there to support you. And my husband, I know him since I'm 16 years old, and I would never throw him away, and he would never throw me away. So we basically kind of worked it out. And I believe that I was chosen to write the book because I always kind of had a secret dream of being a writer. And in college, everyone got back their first English papers with A's and B's and notations. I got mine back with a big red letter C on it with no notations. And I went to the professor and I said, what can I do to improve my writing? And he said, honey, some people are writers and some aren't, and you're not a writer. I believed him. I didn't pick up a pen for more than 15 years because I kept hearing his voice in my head. Then I was an extra with the movie The Natural with Robert Redford, and I was on the set for about a month. And every night I came home, I was bombarded with questions by my family, by my neighbors, by my friends. And finally, I said to a friend of mine who was a writer, I said, I'm so tired of telling the same story again and again. She said, well, write it down and I'll make it into a story for you. And what she did is she relieved me of the angst. And I sat down and I said, I saw an ad in the paper, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote this whole thing. And she looks at it. She said, Carren, it's a story and it's finished. And Women's Day agreed with her. They published it as their major story. Me and Robert Redford, they called it.
Wow.
So I still could hear this teacher's voice in my head, you're not a writer, but it wasn't quite as strong. And I started writing little pieces and I got a lot of rejections and I got a few acceptances here and there. And it grew and my confidence grew. And whenever I do a workshop, I tell people, don't ever listen to anyone who tells you you cannot or you are not. You know, some people might be easier. You don't see all the mountains of discarded paper that I have from this project. You only see the finished product. You know, and that's how writing is. It's, you know, it's sitting yourself down, sticking to the seat of that chair and doing it. I started writing the book because it needed to be written. And I've written 7 other books in addition.
Wow.
So it wasn't a one-shot deal.
Yes.
But I did a mystery that takes place in Coney Island, and the second in my Coney Island series is coming out hopefully within a few months. And I'm a very eclectic writer. And it's just, you know, if somebody writes all mysteries, people know to look for you if they're mystery readers. But because I write eclectic books, it's very difficult. But anyway, if people go to my website, they'll see my work. And I think each book stands for itself and each book talks, you know,
Absolutely.
tells its story.
So when you started writing, the floodgates opened. Fiction, nonfiction.
Basically, yes. Yeah.
You were just ready to start writing. Well, as an author who writes both fiction and nonfiction, is one harder than the other for you, or are they so completely different it's like apples and oranges?
You know, it's like having a child and then having another. Your love grows to expand. Each book becomes the precious one.
I love that.
You know, and each book is an individual. I had somebody come up to me at a workshop and she said, well, I have a great idea for a story, but I want to wait till I can really write well. So I'll write another book first. I said, write the book you're passionate about. It'll come to you. And she did. She, you know, I said, well, what's the story about? And she kind of told me, but when she started talking about this particular book, her face glowed. It lit up. I said, that's the book you have to write.
Yes.
And that's how my books have all come to me in different ways. When I moved back to Brooklyn, I live in Brooklyn, New York. I was walking past a park early in the morning and there were a group of people doing Tai Chi. And for some reason, it came to me, my dad used to take my children to the park. And what if a grandfather took a child to the park and he saw that, you know, adults, and because the child would think the park was for children. And that became Grandpa and Me in the Park in the City. It's a rhyming picture book. And then I was at a conference and they were doing visualizations and you had to close your eyes and visualize. And I visualized a woman on a mound in the beach. And when she turned sideways, she was pregnant. And that night, as I'm sleeping, the name Mallory McGill came to me. And I thought, somebody has taken her baby. And that was the beginning of In the Shadow of the Wonder Wheel that took place in Coney Island. And so each book started differently. When I was living in Buffalo for a while, and there was a fruit stand closing for several days. And he said 50 pounds of potatoes, $3 or something. It was really a great deal. So I stopped and he said, tell you what, I'll give you 3 bags because I'm closing the stand. And I came home with 150 pounds of potatoes. So what do you do with them? So I had my kids running all over the neighborhood, giving bags of potatoes to everyone. And then neighbors started giving me recipes. And that wound up to be a cookbook called Potatoes with a Peel. 101 self-ordering recipes with potatoes, And so that was a different book. And then I was doing a workshop at the writers conference that I attended, and that became a writer's journey, what to know before, during, and after writing a book. And I think that one it's a marvelous book to have. It's the mistakes I made, the things I learned along my way. It's got little exercises for people to do. And so that was its own book. But before I started that book, I started the one about the Wonder Wheel, about the baby, the missing baby. And then so many people came to my workshop, and they came one year after another. I said, but I already gave you the information. And they said, no, you have more information every year. So I stopped one book and I wrote the other book. And then I went back to the other book. But each one, as I picked it up, right now I just finished a book called The Cahill Ghost. And it's about a 13-year-old ghost who has to find out exactly what happened before she could go to her beyond and meet her family, and takes place in 1905. And that happened because somebody posted something on Facebook saying, does anybody believe in supernatural? And there were so many posts, I couldn't believe it. And years before, we had stayed at the Holiday Inn on Grand Island. And one of the women who worked there told me a story about a ghost who inhabited that hotel. And she stayed with me forever. Her name was Tanya, but my ghost is Letitia. And so that book came to me, and it just, people started telling me their stories, and those were incorporated into this book about this little girl.
Fantastic.
And
I love that
I have
you know.
a lesbian paranormal. It's called Tangled Ribbons. I had to stop and think. And it started out as a relationship story with two women, and all of a sudden, as I'm typing, it comes up. But I knew that. I sat back like, who's this I? And I realized she has a spirit guide. And so it became a book with two parallel worlds in it. And then the other character in the book was nudging me and saying, what about me? What about me? So she had to have a spirit guide. This is a funny story. I mean, I'm sorry I'm going on and on, but after the book came out a while later, the Married Women book, I had an article in Newsweek, and they sent me the letters that they received about my article. And one of them was from somebody named Cornelia. And she said, if I found out something like that after I was married, I'd keep my mouth shut and take it to my grave. And I thought, that poor soul. So when I started writing this book about these two women, the spirit guide became Cornelia. And it's got a twist ending because she's as nasty as can be, but then you find out why, and she changes. So each book started itself.
Absolutely.
So I've enjoyed it.
I love that you mentioned with all of your fiction stories what that impetus was. And sometimes the impetus was something that happened to you, like ending up with 50 pounds of potatoes. And sometimes the impetus was something that you saw, like a woman on the beach with a baby. So many times people come to me and say, I would love to write a book. I want to write fiction. I want to write stories, but I don't have any ideas. And you've just proven that ideas are everywhere.
Absolutely.
It's just kind of tuning, like they're just flying through the air, and you need to be open to them, go through life with your eyes open. But most of us probably hit like 10, 15 story ideas a day just in the course of our existence, and you acted on them, which is amazing.
People are afraid. They think, they're seeing 400 pages piled on their desk, and it's very terrifying, very frightening. So what I say in my book on a writer's journey is, think of each chapter as a short story, and then it's not as overwhelming. And you put all the notes that refer to the one chapter in the folder number 1, and then you put the next notes. Maybe this is for chapter 5, and you put it in folder number 5. So if you break it down to smaller bits, it's a little easier. But I can't say it didn't go that easily. With the Married Women book, I had joined a group of professional networkers, women in business, and we all sat around round tables. And every month they'd come up with another topic, and as we discussed the topic, we got to know each other. And one topic was something I'm having difficulty with. And we went around the table. Somebody was having difficulty with childcare. Somebody needed a new apartment. Somebody looking for a new job. I said, I'm having difficulty finding time to write because I work full time. And they asked what I was writing about. And I told them about the book. Anyway, then one of the other women said, I'm having difficulty in getting people to help me with mailings and things for this organization. And everyone said they'd help. And I said, I'd help. And she said to me, I don't want your help. She said, what chapter are you on? And maybe I was on chapter 4, chapter 5. And she said, next month, I want to hear you're on chapter 7. And what she did is she gave me the confidence. She believed in my book enough to tell me it was important to do it. And so I never learned her last name. Her first name was Doris, and she has a little credit in the book just for telling me that. So
And
all these things, people come into our lives for different reasons. And yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that story, because too often we do for others and don't do for ourselves. There you were, ready to do her whole mailing list, when you had just 5 minutes earlier mentioned that you were having trouble finding time to write, and yet you were giving away that time. And that's unbelievably selfless. But sometimes as a writer, you have to be a little selfish. And I'm glad that she allowed you to be selfish about that. And perhaps Doris also wanted a copy of your book, so she wanted it finished because she wanted to find out for herself.
Never know.
You don't know, but Doris was like, I gotta find out what it all says in this book, because like
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier, there are a lot more people who are potential readers for your book than you might have realized at the outset, especially when you were at that conference and everybody was asking a million questions, which became the basis for, I'm sure, many of the chapters of your book. I must ask you, because you mentioned it with what some of the things that women were asking. You mentioned a husband and children and telling them, you were writing this book and this book was coming out. Just out of curiosity, which was the more difficult conversation, the husband or the children?
The husband.
You said they were all supportive, and
Well,
I'm
my son has a lot of friends in the arts,
okay.
and so he's comfortable with people, gay people, straight people. And when I came out to my daughter, when I told her about it, she said, I never wanted to know what you and Dad did behind closed doors, and I don't want to know what you're doing behind closed doors now. But the next day she called me and she said, I told my friend about you, and she said, and he came out to me. He had never come out to anyone else, but I made it comfortable enough for this teenage boy to come out. So,
My
well, maybe he was in his 20s.
right,
Yeah.
but all of the lives that you are changing, even a teenage boy or a young man, not the audience for your book per se, but
No, but he felt comfortable enough to talk
exactly,
about it. Yeah, he
exactly
was in his early 20s, I'm sure, at the
right.
time.
The fact that you are open and comfortable means that other people are seeing that, like that woman who passed your book being put out in the bookstore window.
Yeah, yeah,
You've really opened a whole lot of doors for people, and your courage in doing so, because believe me, this took an awful lot of courage. The book, your family, you know a lot of people, like that woman who said she'd rather go to her grave with the secret, and you thought, how terrible that her whole life would be a lie.
yeah, yeah. Cornelia, never forgot her name.
you know
But in Tangled Ribbons, there's a twist ending. That's my lesbian romance. And it's just, I love it. I love what happens to her and why she is who she is. Yeah. And some of the characters came from people that I had spoken to, like their kind of stories, and some of them totally created themselves. This Cornelia it was her own creation. She just, the more I wrote, the more I wanted to write about her, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Amazing. That's
it
amazing.
was fun.
I
But what I tell people, I'd like to share this, because a lot of people say, but how do you write? Do you have a special time?
right.
I say, make a list, make 2 lists, the people who are supportive and the people who are not supportive, and never talk about your writing to the people who are not supportive. because they'll pull you down so quickly. You mean you don't want to go out to dinner? Oh, come on, it's a good movie. And the people who are supportive will stand behind you.
Right, right.
And I've been very lucky that I have a lot of supportive people behind me.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but
And that's great advice for us, whether you're a writer or you're taking up, dancing or painting, or even just, on a career path or debating, whether or not you even want to have children. There are people in your life who build you up and people in your life who tear you down. And the sooner you realize which people are in which corner and you spend time
right.
with those people, the better off you will be.
Absolutely.
That's a huge statement. I was going to ask you two questions. One is, I always ask authors who are with me for tips for a new author. I'm also going to ask you for tips for people who might be discovering they're a married woman in love with their friend or so, just because we have that as a topic. But we'll start with writers, and that's a great tip, which is surround yourself with support. What else would you tell our aspiring writers out there?
Surround yourself with positive people. It's not how long it takes you to write. It's a finished product. I have my friend's daughter, when she was 12, wanted to be a writer. It was my son's friend. And she got a rejection letter in the mail, and she was dancing all over the house. Mommy, I got a rejection letter. And her mother says, honey, a rejection letter means they didn't want your piece. She says, I know, but it means I'm a real writer, because every real writer gets rejection letters. And she knew that was part of the trip. So what I would tell people is send your piece out and have on your desk a list of where you're going to send it if it comes back rejected. Don't put it in the drawer. Don't wait. Get it back out in the mail the same day. But if you get several rejection letters with no handwritten notes, then maybe you need to relook at your piece. If you get handwritten notes, try us again, but not, this piece was not for us, you're on the right track. But rejection is part of writing.
Yes, rejection absolutely is part of writing. I know in Stephen King's memoir on writing, he knew that so well that when he got his first rejection letter, and he got many, he had a nail in his attic, which was his office, and he stuck it up on the nail, and eventually he needed a longer nail and a stake. Yes, even the top writers have so many rejection letters, and he just kind of put the nail there. As he sent off the first one, he was ready, because real writers get rejection letters. I love
In the
that.
writer's journey, I have a whole section on the famous rejection letters.
Oh my gosh.
Anne Frank, when her father tried to publish her diary, many rejection letters, so many. But some of them are fun stories. Nobody's interested in stories about animals. That was a rejection letter from, oh gosh, the book is skipping me.
It's not Where the Wild Things Are. I feel like I heard
Yeah.
the rejection letter somewhere.
It'll come to me.
Yes.
This is, I keep a pad and a pencil near my desk, in the bedroom near my bed, in the kitchen. I have one in the bathroom, because when ideas come, they just flow through.
Fantastic.
Like you just saw now.
Exactly. They're just flowing through. And what would you tell the woman who has just maybe discovered, possibly even later in life, that she loves women? What would you tell that person?
I'd say, don't be hasty.
Mm.
Don't jump at anything. When I first found out about myself, people said, oh, you have to leave your marriage. But then I thought to myself, maybe there are other ways this can work. Maybe a redefined relationship. So don't listen to people, again, the naysayers. No, you must do this. Everybody is not wearing the same pair of shoes. Everybody's not in the same place. Some women that I interviewed said they had all intentions of leaving their husband, but first they wanted to complete their education. And then what they realized is they were able to redefine their relationships and make it work. Some who felt they were going to remain in their marriages, didn't work. But again, it takes two people. You have to know who you're married to. But the most important thing is, once you say the words, you can't ever take them back.
Mm.
You have to be prepared for whatever journey will follow. I just did an essay. I think it's going to be in October of the Ethel. That's one of the um, magazines from ARP. It's
Hmm.
on an online magazine, and it's on relationships between women, and it's about older women. Many of them, straight their whole lives, are turning to women because men are dying earlier. You know, there's a big population of women, and might be just for friendships, but they might be missing holding and cuddling, and they may turn to another woman for that. There's like society. When I was younger, we knew girls married boys and boys married girls, and that was it. But if I showed you the crayons red, yellow, and blue and said, "What's your favorite color?" and I never showed you chartreuse and purple and orange, you're choosing from a limited selection. And that's what was happening in our world. And now we're more open thanks to magazines, and professionals that have come out. We people are more comfortable coming out on their own. And so our world is changing.
Yes, it
And
is.
it's a very natural thing. Everyone's first love is another woman. It's the sense, the sound, the touch, the smell, the feel of the mother. And then when little girls are 2 or 3, they're told, no, you're going to marry somebody like your daddy. And so they follow the rule. But the generations have changed since this book, the first edition, came out in 1998.
Wow.
And many things have changed since then. And many things have remained the same. There's one chapter in the third edition on woulda, coulda, shoulda is the title of it. And I interviewed women who had chosen to remain or chosen to leave their marriages years before. And some were happy with the choices they made and some weren't. So it's part of life.
Well,
I don't know if I mentioned, but the third edition has just come out as a classic.
oh,
It's
fantastic.
25 years after the first edition was written, and it still has it resonates with people.
That's amazing. Well, let me just remind our listeners about Married Women Who Love Women and More by author Carren Strock, available at online bookstores, but also please visit KarrenStrock.com for this book as well as her fiction books, because Carren is just, oh my goodness, a Renaissance woman here. And I'm just so delighted to have you on. Carren, you're changing lives all over. I'm thrilled to have you on the show with me today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. You're delightful.
Oh, such my pleasure. And I know that being here today will change people. Thank you.
Thank you so much.